Britain was still covered in soot and ration books when the motorcar began to feel like hope again. Factories that had once built bombers returned to building family saloons. Rain glistened across narrow terraced streets. Men in flat caps queued outside dealerships simply to stare through showroom glass at polished chrome they could barely afford. For a country exhausted by war, cars became symbols of recovery, of dignity, of ambition. But not every British car received the future it deserved. Some arrived too early, some were strangled by poor management, others were quietly abandoned despite genuine brilliance. And somewhere between smoky Midlands factories and windswept country roads, a generation of remarkable machines slowly disappeared into history. Tonight, we count down 10 forgotten British cars from the 1940s that deserved far better than history gave them. And if you enjoy these journeys into Britain's lost motoring past, consider subscribing for more stories hidden beneath the chrome and rain-soaked roads of another era.
At number 10, the Morris 8 Series E. The humble yet strangely elegant Morris represented something deeply important to ordinary British families: mobility, independence, escape from crowded railway platforms and cold bus stops. Its tiny 918cc engine produced barely 23 horsepower, but for many households, that hardly mattered. What mattered was ownership itself. The rounded bodywork looked modern for its day, almost cheerful against the gray backdrop of post-war Britain. Fathers polished them proudly on Sunday mornings, while children sat inside pretending to drive to the seaside. The Morris became part of family life. Yet it was often dismissed as outdated, almost as soon as peace returned. Competitors evolved faster. Buyers wanted more comfort, more speed, more sophistication. The Morris 8 slowly faded into the background, despite being one of the cars that helped Britain stand on its feet again. And compared with what came next, its shortcomings seemed almost forgivable.
At number 9, the Triumph Roadster. The Triumph Roadster arrived with optimism written into every curve. Built between 1946 and 1949, it looked glamorous in a nation still recovering from devastation. Large, flowing wings, sweeping lines, and a folding rumble seat gave it an almost American confidence. People stopped and stared when one passed through town. Underneath, however, was a car struggling to find its place. The 1.8-liter engine lacked the performance its appearance promised, and the heavy bodywork made it feel older than buyers expected. Still, owners adored the attention it attracted. Returning servicemen dreamed of driving one through the countryside, with the roof folded down on rare sunny afternoons. But Britain desperately needed exports and practicality, not romantic roadsters. The Triumph Roadster became an expensive curiosity at precisely the wrong moment in history. Production ended quietly. What followed would become even more tragic.
At number 8, the Singer SM1500. The Singer SM1500 should have been a turning point for British family motoring. When it appeared in 1948, it looked startlingly modern. The streamlined body, integrated headlights, and smooth silhouette hinted at a future Britain had barely imagined yet. Compared with pre-war designs still cluttering British roads, the Singer looked almost continental. Its 1507cc engine was respectable enough, but the real appeal was emotional. Buyers felt sophisticated driving one. Middle-class families saw it as a step upward in life. Parked outside suburban semi-detached homes, the SM1500 suggested progress. But quality problems quickly damaged confidence. Reliability frustrations spread quietly through ownership circles, and Singer lacked the resources to recover properly. The company slowly slipped into irrelevance, despite building one of the most forward-thinking British saloons of its time. And then came a car that deserved to become a national institution.
At number 7, the Jowett Javelin. The Jowett Javelin was brilliant. There is no other word for it. Launched in 1947, the Javelin looked unlike anything else Britain produced. Wide, aerodynamic, and technically advanced, it featured independent front suspension and a flat-4 engine producing around 50 horsepower.
At a time when many British cars still felt rooted in the 1930s, the Javelin felt genuinely futuristic. Owners loved the way it handled narrow country roads. It was fast, stable, and surprisingly refined. Journalists praised it enthusiastically. Some believed it represented the future of British engineering. But small manufacturers struggled in post-war Britain. Production problems, financial strain, and limited dealer networks slowly strangled Jowett's ambitions. Families who bought Javelins often adored them, yet the company itself could not survive the pressure. The next car carried even greater expectations.
At number 6, the Humber Super Snipe. Few names sounded more prestigious in post-war Britain than Humber, and the Humber Super Snipe was designed to embody authority itself. Large, imposing, and dignified, it became associated with businessmen, senior officials, and military officers. The long bonnet and stately grille projected quiet confidence on Britain's recovering roads. Inside, there was polished wood, broad seating, and the comforting smell of leather and wool. To many families, seeing a Humber parked outside a hotel or government building symbolized success beyond their reach. But beneath the elegance was a car increasingly trapped between worlds. Too expensive for ordinary buyers, yet lacking the glamour of true luxury marks, the Super Snipe slowly lost its identity. Younger drivers wanted modernity. Export markets demanded sharper engineering. Still, for those who owned one, the Humber represented something deeply British: reserved prestige, dignity without extravagance. The next car would lose something even more painful: its future.
At number 5, the Leah Francis 14 HP. The Leah Francis 14 HP was beautifully engineered. That was both its strength and its downfall. Hand-built craftsmanship filled every inch of the car. The steering felt precise, the ride smooth, the engineering thoughtful. In another era, Leah Francis might have flourished as a respected British luxury manufacturer. But post-war Britain was brutal toward small car makers. Materials were scarce, costs climbed relentlessly. Large manufacturers dominated production, while smaller firms fought simply to survive. Owners often formed emotional attachments to their Leah Francis cars because they felt personal, individual, human. They were not mass-produced machines rolling endlessly from giant factories. They carried character. Yet character alone could not save the company. And the car at number 4 carried an even heavier burden.
At number 4, the Standard Vanguard. The Standard Vanguard was supposed to represent modern Britain. Introduced in 1947, it embraced bold American-inspired styling at a time when British streets still looked conservative and worn. Its slab-sided bodywork, wide grille, and spacious cabin gave families a glimpse of the future. The 2.1-liter engine delivered dependable, if unspectacular, performance, and exports became crucial to Britain's struggling economy. Across Australia, India, and Africa, the Vanguard became part of Britain's industrial identity abroad. At home, however, reactions were divided. Some admired its modernity. Others thought it looked awkward and oversized. Yet for countless families, finally owning a Vanguard after years of wartime sacrifice felt profoundly emotional. Holiday trips suddenly became possible. Rural relatives no longer seemed unreachable. But despite respectable success, the Vanguard never received the lasting recognition it deserved. It became overshadowed by flashier rivals and slowly disappeared from public memory. What came next disappeared even faster. At number 3, the Alvis TA14. The Alvis TA14 carried the weight of pre-war elegance into a changing world. Built from 1946 onward, it was refined, conservative, and beautifully finished. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. Coach-built bodies from companies like Mulliners gave the TA14 genuine presence. Driving one through rainy London streets must have felt wonderfully dignified. Quiet engine notes, smooth leather interiors, a sense of calm sophistication in an exhausted nation. But beneath the polished surface, the design already felt old-fashioned.
The performance disappointed some buyers, and younger post-war motorists increasingly wanted innovation rather than tradition. Alvis remained admired, yet strangely distant from mainstream Britain. Expensive, exclusive, fading. And then there was a car that perhaps deserved success more than any other on this list.
At number 2, the Bristol 400. If Britain had properly supported companies like Bristol after the war, the nation's automotive story might have looked very different. Introduced in 1947, the Bristol 400 combined aviation-level engineering precision with remarkable refinement. Its 2.0-liter straight-six engine delivered smooth performance, while the elegant bodywork carried understated sophistication rather than flashy excess. Everything about it felt carefully engineered, intelligent, mature. Owners often describe them with affection bordering on obsession. Long-distance journeys felt effortless, doors closed with vault-like solidity. Even decades later, surviving examples still radiate craftsmanship. But Bristol remained painfully niche, too expensive, too exclusive, and too detached from ordinary British life to become a national success story. It deserved wider recognition than history ultimately granted it. And finally, at number 1 came the car that symbolized both Britain's brilliance and its frustration better than almost any other.
At number 1, the Rover P3. The Rover P3 embodied quiet confidence, solid construction, elegant proportions, comfortable interiors. It was not flashy, but it felt dependable in a world desperate for stability. Doctors drove them, professionals admired them, families aspired to them. The engineering was thoughtful rather than dramatic. The 6-cylinder engine delivered smooth performance, and the cabin insulation made long journeys feel serene by post-war standards. Rover understood restraint better than most British manufacturers. But the P3 arrived during a moment when Britain's car industry desperately needed bold transformation. While some foreign competitors accelerated toward modernity, many British companies remained cautious, comfortable, conservative. The Rover deserved better because it represented a crossroads Britain never fully navigated. A country capable of extraordinary engineering, yet too often held back by hesitation, financial strain, and industrial decline that would worsen in the decades ahead. And perhaps that is why these forgotten cars still matter. They were never simply machines.
They carried newly married couples toward uncertain futures. They sat outside terraced homes while children slept upstairs. They crossed rain-soaked countryside roads during family holidays that people remembered for the rest of their lives. Some failed unfairly. Some arrived too soon. Some were victims of changing tastes and collapsing industries. But together, they tell the story of a Britain rebuilding itself through steel, chrome, and determination. A nation searching for pride again. And somewhere in quiet garages and forgotten barns across the country, many of these cars still survive. Silent reminders of a time when owning a motor car meant far more than transportation. It meant hope. And if one of these forgotten British cars still lives in your memory, perhaps because your parents owned one or your grandfather spoke about one, let us know in the comments below. These stories deserve to be remembered. And if you enjoy exploring the lost history of Britain through its cars, consider subscribing. Because in our next film, we uncover the British luxury cars that looked magnificent in the showroom, but quietly ruined the people who bought them.